They are going to be our speakers tonight, and they're going to address imposter syndrome and dietetics. And so we're so excited to have them. And I'm going to introduce each one of them so you'll know a little bit more about them. And so Matt is a postdoctoral research scholar and registered dietitian nutritionist in the Stanford Prevention Research Center at Stanford University. Matthew received his bachelor's degree in nutrition and food sciences from Louisiana State University and completed his doctoral degree in nutritional sciences and dietetic internship from the University of Texas at Austin. Among several research areas, he's interested in how barriers such as imposter syndrome can be overcome to foster diversity and inclusion within science, academia, and the dietetics profession. As a sought-after communicator for his ability to translate complex ideas into simple, direct, and persuasive messages for diverse audiences, he has presented his work at conferences across the United States as well as internationally. Matthew was the 2022 recipient of the California Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics Recognized Young Dietitian of the Year Award and is a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. He is also a mentor in the RD mentorship program. So welcome, Matthew, and thank you for your service in our profession and in the mentorship program. And Dylan is a senior nutrition specialist with Ketchum and a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics who works across the nation, across nutrition, food, beverage, ingredient, agriculture, and wellness accounts to ensure accuracy in reporting science and research communications, as well as providing strategic reputation management counsel. He is a registered dietitian, received his master's from Texas Tech University. Dylan has presented research at conferences, including the Obesity Society Obesity Week, the American Society for Nutrition's annual nutrition meeting, Experimental Biology, the Association for Healthcare Social Media's annual meeting, and the Food and Nutrition Conference and Expo. Dylan has also published several scientific manuscripts in peer-reviewed journals. His research interests include appetite hormones, obesity, weight bias, feeding behaviors, diversity in the dietetic profession, and the imposter phenomenon among nutrition and dietetics professionals. He has been featured in publications including Food and Nutrition Magazine and practice applications of the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Dylan also spends time mentoring students about the growing field of nutrition communications and precepting dietetic interns from internships around the country. Dylan was involved in the executive committee at the Cultures of Gender and Age member interest group of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and is also the current social media chair for the Early Career Nutrition Interest Group of the American Society for Nutrition. Thank you, Dylan, as well, for being here and for what you're doing for our profession. So with that, please let's welcome Matthew and Dylan for their presentation. Thank you all for being here to support them tonight.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Karen, for the warm introduction and for all of you for tuning in today. Here are the disclosures that Dylan and I have that are relevant to today's presentation. And with that, we'll dive right into kind of learning objectives of what we hope to cover in the 50 or so minutes that we have left today. And we're really hoping to leave some time at the end for questions that you have, especially as it relates to the mentees that you have that you're mentoring through this program. So we hope to deconstruct what is imposter syndrome. We'll describe what are the signs and of it that you might see in your mentees or that you might experience yourself. And then we'll lastly talk about strategies that you can use to directly combat some of those negative feelings. And here are the performance indicators for today's presentation as well. So jumping right in, imposter syndrome, it goes by a number of names: imposter phenomenon, imposter experience, and imposter syndrome. But it can be summed up as a very general experience of persistently feeling like a phony, a fake, or a fraud, despite having evidence suggesting otherwise. And it's often characterized by feelings of incompetence, inadequacy, or perceived fraudulence. Now, imposter syndrome is usually a very persistent fear that others are going to find out that you're not competent or you're not capable, despite you having objective success. Individuals even very high achieving individuals often have the inability to internalize their successes that they may have had. And as a result, they seek external validation as opposed to that internal one. And they attribute success to just sheer luck or having social contacts or just the thoughts and perceptions of others. And I want to emphasize that when we go into new situations, we might feel a little nervous, and that's fine. But this is taking it to a completely new level. So with those definitions, I now want to ask, and feel free to write in the chat if you feel comfortable, up to your the point in your career, have you had feelings of impostorism or feeling like a fraud at some time? And while you do that and contribute some thoughts to the chat, we'll describe who struggles with impostorism. So psychologist Clancy Imes first described imposter phenomenon back in 1978. And over the several decades since, impostorism has been further established and quantified in numerous studies. There's actually a systematic review of 61 studies and over 14,000 participants that was published in the Journal of General Internal Medicine that found that imposter syndrome varied widely depending on what screening tool and cutoff was used to accept the symptoms. However, those feelings of fraudulence were common across gender, race, age, and a range of occupations. Although the study, the meta-analysis did find that it was more prevalent and disproportionately impacted the experiences of underrepresented or disadvantaged groups. However, that study included professionals, college students, academics, nurses, marketing managers, CEOs, teachers, celebrities. Pretty much everyone can fall prey to imposter syndrome. So now let's look at how it can really form, and especially with the shapes and varieties. Most often, it forms a very cyclical pathway. And here's just one example. And I'll take you through an example of perhaps a dietetic intern. We'll start in the upper right-hand corner. So imagine a dietetic intern starting a new rotation, and the feelings of I'm not good enough start to come into their head. They might often first try to rationalize why that is, and they might come up with a reason, and perhaps they feel that they're not good enough because they need to just be an RD. They need the more practice experience. And maybe they even got into their dietetic internship by pure luck. Maybe their dietetic internship director made the wrong choice about them. But they might decide, you know what, I'm here, let me fake it till I make it. And that might help provide them with some momentary relief. But those dreadful feelings of imposter syndrome quickly come back. And that intern might start feeling like a fraud again, and they might try to shy away from opportunities to try a new caseload or try to see a new patient. Again, this is completely an extra step above just feeling nervous or uneasy. So the internship director might commend them for the work that they're doing and give some positive reinforcement. And that might help that intern feel some relief until that glow begins to wear off. And then they go and they start on this cyclical pathway again. This time, they might discount any of that previous competence that they might have gained in that rotation or the achievements that they made. And they might create a new reason. Maybe their preceptor was just trying to be nice on them because they're new. And the next time they're really going to get called out for not knowing enough or not being as competent as they should. And they'll rationalize that any of those prior successes or progress that they made in that rotation was just purely a fluke. And this cyclical pathway can occur on and on and on. And rather than growing from experiences and starting to become more confident, they just stay in that zone where they are persistently feeling uneasy, and they again try to shy away from embracing new experiences or taking up new opportunities. So maybe we can back up for a second and say, why do we even feel like frauds to begin with? Well, at the end of the day, we're human and we're raised by humans. And early in life, the people around you, your parents, your siblings, your teachers, they all played a really important role in forming your expectations, your beliefs, and your own self-perceptions. You learned what was valued, as well as what got you approval. You knew what got you that pat on the back and that encouragement, but you also knew what got you disapproval. However, as much as we want to sometimes blame our childhoods for everything, the society that we work in, we play, and we live in also really heavily feeds into any kind of self-doubt that we might have. Our society is built on individualism, with perfection as that unspoken rule. And for imposters, their personal worth and success is based on accomplishments and the avoidance of any kind of disapproval, shame, or humiliation that might accompany failure. Now, based on the last few slides, we can see that feelings of impostorism are pretty common and they're quite normal to have. I want to introduce now the term pluralistic ignorance. This is where we each doubt ourselves privately, and we believe that we're alone in thinking that way because no one else voices their doubts. We're all harboring those feelings of insecurity, but we keep them hidden. Now imagine how our relationships with others in our workplaces would differ if we were able to confide in one another about our insecurities and have those self-doubts and work collectively to really empower one another in those particular spaces. So Dr. Valerie Young, who's a leading expert in the subject of imposter syndrome, actually came up with 5 different ways in which imposter syndrome can manifest itself. So I want you to think about yourself and maybe even the mentee that you're working with. Have you noticed through any of the conversations that you've had with them, any of these ways that impostorism can kind of sneak up? So first is the soloist. So this is one where individuals believe their work must be accomplished alone and refuse to take credit for work if they received any kind of help. And asking for help equates to feelings of failure or not being good enough. The next one is the expert, and this is where individuals feel expected to know everything or be able to do everything and feel ashamed when they don't. And these individuals often seek out additional certifications or trainings because they feel that their current knowledge and ability just isn't enough. And I'll personally just share, this is the one that I fit into. Even though I have several certifications and I have an alphabet soup after my name sometimes, I still always feel like maybe if I got this extra certification, I would just feel even more confident in what I'm doing and the research that I'm doing. Another type is the perfectionist. So these individuals set impossibly high standards for themselves. And when they don't achieve those, they beat themselves up when they make any kind of small mistake. The fourth type is the super person. So these individuals feel they need to excel at every role they take in life to prove that they're the real deal. So these individuals compare themselves to others, and they often push themselves to work harder and harder just to measure up. In a sense, they're really addicted to the validation that comes from working and not actually the work outcomes itself. And the last one is the natural genius. So these individuals judge their competence based on how easy or how quickly they can get through some work, as opposed to their actual efforts. So in other words, if they take a really long time to be able to master something, then they feel shame. And this group is similar to our perfectionists, but these individuals don't just judge themselves based on these kind of high expectations. They also judge themselves on getting it right on the first try. And I know we can probably say a lot of students really try to do this, or our interns try to do this. And going back to the slide, I think a lot of times dietitians especially fall into the category of the expert, because as dietitians or even students and interns, we feel the pressure to be the nutrition expert, especially when we have to work against influencers and non-credentialed folks who are providing sometimes non-evidence-based information to the public. And as we all know, we're taught a lot in schools and during our internships as well. Food science, clinical nutrition, management, food service, it goes on, which is a great thing for us as RDs. Our breadth is quite large. And I'm here to tell you that you can still be the nutrition expert without having to know everything about nutrition. As RDs, again, we have that wide breadth of understanding of lots of nutrition topics. So when you're feeling discouraged or feeling like a nutrition imposter, I want to remind you of this capital T. While you might not have the depth of knowledge on everything, you most likely have some understanding of the topic. And even when you don't, it's okay, because other areas are going to be the areas where you do have that depth of expertise and knowledge. And at the end of the day, it's the combination of both the breadth and depth that help make us the nutrition experts. And I want to wrap up this last little section by also mentioning that, again, impostorism is this really exponentiated fear or nervousness about certain explanations. But we also have a disproportionate rate of impostorism. And the root cause of some of the higher rates, especially within underrepresented groups, is likely a result of inequities that exist within the structural and social environments that we have. And in acknowledging that the dietetics profession is predominantly able-bodied, cisgendered, heterosexual, and white, we certainly need to make improvements across the dietetics profession as an important first step, because it provides diverse role models needed to help encourage students to enter and remain within our profession. So with that, I'll turn things over to Dylan.
Hey, thanks, Matt. How about that, Matt? Great job. That's awesome. Keep the chat going, keep it working. If you have any questions as I'm going, please put them in the chat. We'll talk about them later. But I'm going to kind of get into now some of the evidence specific to registered dietitians in this area of imposter syndrome, right? So, you know, when we first started to talk about this topic, Matt and I, we really wanted to see like what existed out there among other healthcare professions. So we did a little mini review of the evidence, and we started to see that like, wow, like basically every other healthcare profession has some form of impostorism described as just the nature of the job, if you will. You can see in this chart all the different types of professions that have some sort of study looking at impostorism on it. And look at this light blue shading here and the percents. And I want you to remember some of those percents you're seeing now. And again, this is basically the percent of the population studied that are presenting with, you know, some form of impostorism, if you will, right? So we know it exists in other professions, but like, what about the RD profession and or the student experience? So Matt, if you go to the next slide. Well, we looked at that too, and we realized, oh, okay, no one's really published anything on that before. And that was a shock to us because we know that this topic is something that gets talked about, you know, in chat rooms all the time, Reddit, for example, or maybe there's a social media post about it, or, you know, even peer-to-peer conversations that talk about this. You know, they're existing and happening every day, but nothing was really available in the evidence base to back up any of these conversations that were happening. And, you know, that's really important if you want to start to just get a grasp of what is going on in the profession and what the prevalence of this looks like. We couldn't even tell that because no one had looked at that before. So we did. So next slide. So Matt and I and a few other colleagues really wanted to set out to like basically understand how is impostorism affecting you know, the dietetics profession, because no one had done that before. And we were able to do a really nice survey that had all different levels of dietetics professionals, students to NDTRs to even retired folks. And it was over 1,000 people that responded, which is actually amazing because it kind of, you know, this was a snowball sample, if you will, right? We just put this out into the ethos and wanted to see who was going to reply. And that's an amazing response rate on a survey for something like that. So people were really passionate about contributing to the science on this. And here are sort of our results. I'm going to get into them a little bit more on the next slide. But, you know, we basically used a validated scale that Matt may have alluded to before, the Clance Imposter, scale, which is the gold standard, if you will, for measuring imposter syndrome. Now, higher scores, okay, on this scale represent more frequent feelings of impostorism. So as the score goes up, that means more impostorism. As the score goes down, it's less impostorism. Just so you have an idea of what our sample looked like, the range was absolutely insane. So we had people with scores, and again, the scale's out of 100. So we had people with scores as low as 22, which basically indicates no impostorism at all, to all the way up to as high as 99, almost literally off the charts. So Matt, if you go to the next slide, this is the most important metric that we sort of found from our particular study. 62% of our sample presented with frequent or severe IP experiences. That's quite high. Remember, if you go back to that light blue chart with all the percents, no one came close to 62%. I think the highest was like 57 or something like that. 62% in a profession with a sample of over 1,000 people shows you that something's going on, right? So that was a really kind of important finding for us, because it was the first time someone had actually put numbers to this. And it essentially shows that, wow, yeah, this is going on in the dietetic profession quite robustly. And we really need to start to think about how do we form conversations and solutions around this to try to bring some of those numbers down, because it's, you know, as you'll see on the next few slides, it can cause some real damage to folks. So next slide. What we also did as part of our study is we really wanted to look at what are also some like predictors, if you will, of experiencing imposter phenomenon. And how do those things actually impact well-being and or things like job satisfaction, right? Because, you know, at the end of the day, if someone is experiencing imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, that may lead to things like burnout, right? They may not be happy at their place of work or where they're doing their dietetic internship. It may lead them to burn out faster. It may lead them to not take on certain career opportunities. It may make them not feel so great. So there's all these things that come with imposter syndrome, even though it's, you know, self-diagnosed, if you will. There's all these things that come along with the syndrome that can really be detrimental to advancing our profession. So in this case of our study, you know, we found a lot of these predictors, you know, basically presented with being linked with a higher instance of impostorism. So, you know, things like age, right? Things like professional level, all of these things were linked in some way with experiencing more imposter syndrome. What we also found, if you look at the well-being and job satisfaction points, you know, with more impostorism came more burnout and stress. And we would expect to see that, but it's fascinating to actually find that in the dietetic profession. And again, more impostorism came with less job satisfaction and decreased job performance. So these are big time findings when it comes to advancing the profession and ultimately even how things like mentorship might look like, right? So next slide. So, you know, specifically focusing on students in this case, there's some evidence from existing literature and even in cases our study that imposter syndrome affects students quite uniquely and quite robustly. Specifically, it may impact minority students to a higher degree. There may be some sort of mediating relationship between social media usage and time and higher levels of impostorism. And, you know, this last point is actually kind of important. When you think about going through a dietetic program and you think about all the things that come with it, you know, a lot of times you're on your own, or you may feel like you're on your own. A lot of times you're put in new situations where you may not feel like you have the training or knowledge to succeed. And there's also a lot of stress that comes during this time of our careers and our lives. All these things together uniquely impact students and then can lead to impostorism that someone may take with them throughout their career, right? It's not just like it happens once and it's gone. There may be a continuum that follows the person through their career path if it's not appropriately addressed and they don't get the tools they need to manage it. Next slide. So, how do we actually do something about this, right? And what are some of the strategies or things we need to watch out for when it comes to, helping ourselves get through these times, if you will. So again, it's so important to realize and acknowledge and understand that, the field of nutrition and dietetics, being a dietitian, being a NDTR, being in a DI program, et cetera, these are all super flexible positions in the sense of you're doing a lot of different things at once. You're expected to know a lot of different things. You're in multiple different settings. You're through different, career stages with different expectations. This can make you go like a little nuts, right? Like, and start to actually have those feelings of impostorism really creep in. And, that's something when we get to the strategies for how to manage, it's something that is important to recognize and own and really take on, because that's just the nature of being in this field. You're going to be put in positions where you may not know the answer, and that's totally okay. If you look at the roadmap here, look at student, intern, RDN, advanced practitioner, et cetera. There are times throughout all four of those areas of someone's career where they're going to be faced with challenges. And again, it's important for how those challenges are managed, to not let the impostorism come back and do harm. Next slide. I talked about social media a little bit. This is an area that is quite understudied, but from our study and some unpublished data, we do have an idea that social media is a pretty big contributor to impostorism. When you think about it, not only are RDNs competing with non-credentialed experts for being the nutrition expert, but you're competing with your others and other dietitians who may have more followers or may have access to a graphic designer that's helping them do, posts and all these crazy things. It's hard to not look at others on social media as competitors in this sense. And that, if you're not living up to what others are doing, you're somehow inferior. And again, when we talk about some of the management strategies, it's important to think about how social media presents in your life as a dietitian, and how some of these management strategies that I'm about to talk about could be used if you're someone on social media. Next slide. And, again, one of those things that comes back to specific on social media is asking yourself questions like this, right? Are you a better version of yourself than you were yesterday? How have you improved from, where you were a year ago, right? Maybe you've been tracking your followers and you started with 50 followers. Now you're up to 3,000. Even though you're looking at someone who's got 38,000 followers, you just improved your follower count in a year by who knows what that percentage is, right? So there are just little things you can do when it comes to being on social media that can help combat impostorism. And, the only person you really should be comparing is yourself and how you've improved. And that can really be a really awesome technique and tool for trying to manage impostorism on social. Next slide. Now, if there's one slide that you screen grab, they're all great. I hope you screen grab some of Matt's slides too. But this slide is one that Matt and I are really proud of, because these are some of the 5 techniques or tips that we can't stress enough when it comes to managing impostorism. So, and again, this is throughout the continuum of the dietetic career. It doesn't matter if you're a student, you're in a DI, you're retired, it doesn't matter. These are some of the thematic trends across ages in the career path that really manifest to having a good grasp on impostorism. So the first thing you can do is give it a name. This is the most important thing. You have to own what you're experiencing is impostorism, right? Once you own it and you give it a name, you can address it. When you ignore or you try to deflect or you do some other technique, it only delays your ability to really address something head on. So by owning it and acknowledging those uncomfortable feelings of, oh man, I really am not feeling like I'm good enough today. Or, I was offered this promotion, I just don't think I know enough to take on that role. That's imposter syndrome. You're owning it and you're going to address it, right? So that's the first step. Mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. It doesn't matter where you are in your career. Everyone makes them. But for people with imposter syndrome, they feel like when they make these mistakes, it's horrific. It's bad. They're immediately going to be found out as a fake or a fraud or a phony. And that's really going to bring those feelings of impostorism out. Instead of those doom and gloom feelings or those all or nothing feelings with mistakes, you can take something small from the mistake and build on it, right? Remember when we talked about comparing yourself to self? Do the same thing with mistakes. Look at what you did, take something small from it, and use that the next time. Once you go down that rabbit hole of all or nothing mentalities with mistakes, it can really let those impostorism feelings come back into your life. So taking something small from a mistake and learning or writing it down or doing something tangible with it can really help you not go down that path of all or nothing mentality. All right, list of accomplishments. Matt's going to build on this one in the next slide, but all I'll say right now is a list of accomplishments is a great thing to have, and I don't want to ruin too much, so Matt can come on and explain what that looks like in the next slide. Number 4 is interesting, talking to a colleague, right? So this is kind of what we're doing with this program, with mentorship. I mean, that's exactly what's going on here. We're talking to friends, we're talking to colleagues. We're able to air out feelings of impostorism with a trusted peer or a friend. And just by talking about it with someone else can already help alleviate those feelings because you're sharing a commonality, or you're able to glean an insight from someone, or even get reassurance from someone. And even just that little action can really impact how someone may manage those feelings in the future. And then the last one, again, just be kind to yourself, right? Again, we all make mistakes. We all have feelings of impostorism. We're all going to feel like we don't know enough sometimes. We're all going to feel like we're put in a position where we're not good enough. You have to be kind to yourself, and you have to look for those small wins that you've experienced in your life, because once you start letting those feelings of not being good enough or otherwise come back in again, you may go down a road of letting that stuff take over. But I feel really good about Matt's next slide here, because he's going to talk about probably our favorite technique for managing imposter syndrome. So Matt, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Dylan. Again, 5 great strategies on the last slide, but I now really want to turn to what's some of our favorite strategy. And I've given this talk several times, and I just love when people come up to me after at conferences and things like that and say, hey, I took your advice, I did this, and it was really great that I went to that presentation and started doing that. So this is our good news folder. So this is a physical folder that sits at my desk that houses some of the best moments from my career so far. So for me personally, it was my graduate school letter, my postdoc acceptance letters. I have the email when I got my first scientific publication accepted by a journal, and that was after several prior rejections at other journals. I even have the email saying that I was accepted into my dietetic internship. It has screenshots of texts and emails that have come from advisors and internship preceptors telling me that I did a great job. And in the moments of really second guessing myself, and when those creeping sensations of imposter syndrome begin to really start settling in, and I need that extra kick of motivation, I take out this good news folder, and flipping through some of those memories and those accomplishments reminds me that I'm not a fraud. I am capable. There were, of course, times that I was really nervous, and so many opportunities where I rose to the occasion and overcame some of those those feelings of nervousness. There was times where I had the requisite background and I had the skills, I had the knowledge, and other times where I really still had to develop the knowledge and skills and advance on that road to competency. But I did it. And my good news folder reminds me that I've worked hard. Sometimes I've stumbled, but ultimately I persevered. And you can build your own good news folder. And I would encourage both you and your mentee to do this. And you can fill it with emails, certificates, notes, screenshots, whatever it is that you feel proud of and that you've risen to the occasion. One of the best examples that I gotten from one of my peers who heard me give this talk is she adds in pictures of her kids. She remembers that when she was a first-time mom, she felt like a complete fraud. Like, I can't do this. I was not made for this, and felt a lot of nervousness. But now when she looks at pictures of her kids, it fills her with pride that she went through those difficult times. And now she feels like a great mother to those children. So again, this can be a great solution to really take out in moments to really help alleviate and overcome any kind of feelings of imposter syndrome. So now I want to talk especially about mentoring, because it's another wonderful, really method in recognizing and also subsequently addressing imposter syndrome. And for all of you listening in, you're already probably pros with this because you're joining in on the program. And you know that mentorship is already really well ingrained within the nutrition and dietetics profession. It's vital for professional development. It's how we become dietitians. We're mentored by preceptors along as we learn those additional skills in our rotations. And it's also vital for the advancement within our careers. And mentorship can take a variety of different forms. Many times, especially within this program, it's with a student or intern, with a practitioner, but it could also be preceptor and intern. It could be manager and employee, or even just RDN to RDN. And we know that mentoring is that mutual and reciprocal relationship where both parties really utilize those reflective practices and experiential learning to develop new skills, knowledge, and attitudes. But where it can be really important, especially in the context of impostorism, is that mentors can provide mentees with that empathetic listening, motivation, honest feedback, and a general sense of community. Again, those with imposter syndrome might place themselves under really significant pressure to avoid any kind of failure. And mentors can play an important role in shifting from a very fixed mindset that often accompanies impostorism to a growth mindset, and in helping interns or students realize that, again, they're on that road to competency, and that and they can also help them to really reframe any kind of experiences of setbacks or failures that are instead a real part of the learning and growing process. Now, I think it's also very important here to say that sometimes we need to realize the scope of our relationship within mentoring and realize that at sometimes we might not be able to meet every need of our mentee, but we can reach out to those within our networks to find someone that could help co-mentor and fill in the aspects of your particular mentee's needs that you might not be able to as well. Now, we're talking a lot about how to determine if we're feeling impostorism within ourselves, but we can also start noticing it within others as well, especially, again, in the context of this program with our students and interns. And when we really think about it, we might give off the impression that we have everything under control, but we know, sometimes the house can be up in flames when we're inside. We've all had those moments where we probably felt insecure. And that goes back to that topic of pluralistic ignorance, where again, what if we shared with others those moments where we felt insecure, those moments where we felt like a fraud or felt insecure? Now, one of the really ways to kind of do that and have those kind of conversations is that when someone's feeling imposter-like or feeling like they're not adequate, it's one thing to just say, oh, you'll be fine, you'll work through it, I worked through it, blah, blah, blah. But those pandering comments sometimes don't really help to reassure someone. Instead, a better way to do that is to point out specific positive evidence or prior accomplishments that person has done. Oh, look, you've given several presentations in the past to similar groups. I think you have those skills, you have that confidence to be able to do the same thing again, just with this presentation. It's a little bit slightly different, but it really emphasizes those key facts. And when we're giving the facts, then it's hard to go against that evidence and feel that fraudulence. We can also be really supportive in creating a classroom, a clinic, or just a general work environment in which our peers already feel supported and empowered. Now, the biggest pushback that I sometimes get, especially from more seasoned kind of practitioners, is, well, I've had to struggle and work hard to get where I am, and a student or an intern should too. Or something like, well, I don't want to handhold a student or an intern because they're going to need to be able to do this on their own. And I'm not a big fan of either one of those comments because I think at times we can all use a bit of support. And I actually think I like to reframe this as this figurative life preserver. So many times we can swim on our own. However, sometimes every now and then big waves come across and we feel unconfident and unsure of ourselves. And sometimes we just need to have that life preserver or some floaties on, whatever you call them, just to feel secure in the waters all around us. We do have those skills. We can make it to shore on our own or the other side of the pool. We just need a little bit of support along the way. Now, as we start wrapping up, I want to throw out some words that I hear oftentimes, both from students and interns, but also from dietitians and fellow practitioners. Now, think about how many times you've heard, I'm just a graduate student, I'm just an intern, or even worse, I'm just the dietitian. Maybe you even described yourself like that. Now imagine like a physician walked in and instead of saying, oh, I'm just the dietitian, we firmly and confidently said, I am the dietitian. Or in another scenario, what if someone asked what you did for a living? You said, oh, I just do some nutrition consulting. You confidently said you are a nutrition consultant. It's a small change of words, but it can be so impactful. We've all been told to practice those elevator speeches, that 15-second introduction to ourselves. Now I want you to imagine introducing yourself to a complete stranger, and this introduction can extend beyond just a professional setting. How do you want to describe yourself? How would you want your students and your mentees to be able to describe themselves? Will we want them to really diminish who they are and what they've done by saying, I'm just? So I want you to all think and take a second to think about the words that you would use to introduce yourself. And over the course of the rest of the mentoring program, I hope you can keep thinking about that introduction and have a conversation with your student and your mentee about how they would introduce themselves. And do those words really capture who they are or who you are and all that you've done and all that you're really capable of doing? Because at the end of the day, sometimes when we're really feeling like a fraud, one of the best things that we can do is remember who we truly are. And I want to finish with just some simple truths that you have talent, you are capable, and you do belong, and you do really deserve all of your success. So if imposter syndrome is holding you back or your mentee back, making you feel small or burnt out, then everyone really loses. Sometimes we really have to be able to get out of our own ways, not just for ourselves, but for our clients and our patients and our profession at large. And Dylan and I really believe that when we're able to overcome feelings of imposter syndrome within ourselves, within others, and across the profession at large, the true value and potential of RDNs will be realized. So thank you for listening in to today's webinar. I hope some of this resonated with you and some of this information is things that you'll take back to your next call with your mentee. You can feel free to contact us online via any of the channels shown on the slide here. Dylan and I have 2 papers on imposter syndrome, and we're happy to send those out to folks if you have trouble with any kind of paywalls or anything like that. But now I think we have some time for questions. I'll stop sharing. That way you can see our face and we could be more conversational.
Thank you for your presentation. I hope that you are open to asking questions. I'll start actually just I guess as you know, I saw kind of the graph and more seasoned dietitians maybe having less imposter syndrome components, but how do you see, or do you see any difference as people age in the profession and younger people are gaining new knowledge? Do you see any increase in imposter syndrome with that, situation? Because with the aging and maybe not as being tech savvy and savvy with some of the newer information.
Right. I can speak at least to what we found in our our own research, and that we saw a stepwise relationship. So as you got older, you experience fewer and fewer imposter-like experiences. Now you bring up a great point that, every day you're learning new things and new topics come up and things like that. And that can certainly throw a little bit of nervousness your way. But I think one of the things that folks obtain over the course of the career is a greater sense of, I'm going into new situations, I've done something similarly, and I can build upon prior experiences. And we start having that mindset of, I've done a lot of things and I've gained that, I've been on that road to competence. I've encountered difficult situations in the past and I can handle them better. So I think that certainly comes with age or more experience within the profession, that we're able to handle those new situations and those new experiences a whole lot better in that regard. So Dylan, do you have anything to add to that question?
No, I thought that was a wonderful response. I echo everything you said. And I mean, who knows? This could also be a new research question we ask, Matt. It is what are those skills that those folks who are perhaps in older age, what do they use to help manage these feelings? We can only guess at that from previous research, but we need to ultimately test that. So could be a new research question.
Well, I think it's really interesting because we do have a lot of mentors that really benefit from some of the technological skills that our newer mentees and newer professionals have. So thanks for answering that.
I will say it's a two-way street too. You brought up a great point. Like, let's say there is a younger mentee who may know something about tech that the older mentor may not know. That's a two-way relationship whereby the mentor can also always learn something. So that's an interesting way to think about it too. And it goes back to Matt's point of mentality, being open and accepting to new information. That's a great example of, in some situations, someone may feel like, oh, well, this person's younger, I know more, etc. But who knows? It could be that it's the reverse, and that mentor is always willing to learn more and accept more, and that mindset makes them not feel like an imposter. So excellent point.
We didn't ask about self-esteem, particularly in our study, but I would say from my kind of recollection of other studies that self-esteem is really tied with that. And I think just the environment in general that a person is in can certainly kind of contribute to those negative imposter-like experiences. We certainly know that, again, minority individuals are disproportionately impacted by impostorism. And a lot of that is that built environment, the policies, the systems, and the environment that a person walks into that only adds fuel to a lot of different scenarios. It's one thing to just kind of go into a new situation with some feelings of insecurity or impostorism possibly, but if the environment is also not very supportive, then that only just adds, oil to the fire, basically, and can lower self-esteem, where a person feels even worse about their accomplishments or how their competence. And I would imagine that those feelings of impostorism would only be even worse. Great question. I see one question in the chat about sharing your own experiences with and insecurities with the person who is struggling, to show and tell them that it can get better. I personally love sharing those experiences, especially in the past where I felt nervous, or something that I tell my mentees all the time. I've published now dozens and dozens of articles, but I still think back to some of those first ones that I did where it bounced around to a couple of different journals, and I was like, I'm never going to be a scientist. Every journal doesn't want to accept this paper. And so I share those experiences that, I had to learn. I certainly grew as a scientific writer, and those papers got better and better with feedback. The one thing that I would kind of caution with this, and I think back to maybe when I was a graduate student, my fellow graduate students, right before a big test, when we were feeling insecure about a test, we would wound each other up by saying, oh, I'm not ready for this test, I'm going to flunk it. And those kind of things, sharing those kind of that nervousness, I don't think that's particularly helpful. A way to kind of mindset is say, yeah, I was nervous for, maybe the RD exam going in. And I think everyone else in my cohort was also very nervous, but we did X, Y, Z to help prepare, and we did practice exams. And so when we went in, we had practiced a lot. So talking about those experiences in a way of how did you build up your confidence, and talking about experiences in a positive way is a good way to still share your experiences, but in a mindset that can be positive.
The other thing I'll add is, in a lot of cases, in the mentor-mentee relationship, the mentee may hold the mentor at a higher standard, in the sense of they're looking to you for guidance, right? They're looking to you to know it all and be comforting. And you're in this position that may have taken years to get to, and you're a wealth of information. For you to then counter and acknowledge that, well, I haven't always been like this, I have struggled. Here are some examples of where I've struggled, and here's actually what I've learned from those things. Even breaking down those types of barriers in that relationship is massively important for not only the health of that relationship, but to, again, you're using tools that are known to help people manage impostorism. So.
I noticed Bailey had a question in the chat box. I don't know if one of y'all like to address that.
Sure. So have we considered feeling the pressure to practice what they preach, or even look the part? I think it would be excellent to do this in research, as some RDs may feel it may impact how they perform in their job, or even as they mentor. And that's a great thing. I do think that, based off other studies, that folks, especially in the workforce, whenever they go into an environment or a job setting and they don't look like the rest of their peers, that immediately makes you feel like, I'm a fraud, I don't belong in this particular environment. And again, that's one of those circumstances where, if you're already going in feeling like an imposter, it only adds oil to the fire. So we haven't looked at that, but I certainly think it would be interesting. And that's why mentoring can be so impactful, because you start building this community where maybe the folks around you don't look the same, but then you can have an extended network and start realizing that dietitians are in some cases more diverse, that they do more than clinical or food service, or that, there are Hispanic or there are guide dietitians across the United States. I think back to even when I was an intern, I was one guy with 20 fabulous women, but I didn't always have, I think, of all my preceptors, I didn't have a single male dietitian. So I was kind of like, do I fit in here? Did I choose the right profession? And just have those conversations with folks. So I think it is would be an interesting thing to look into. Any other questions?
Matt, I have a question for you. How about that?
Sure.
All right. What are what are the top 3 things you'd recommend to this group to get their good news folder started? How should they do it?
Sure. So number one, again, think across all of your career, the things that you've really been proud of and the times where you felt sometimes the most insecure about your things. And to really think about those emails that you've gotten. I personally get the most pride when I look back at texts from colleagues. I have one. It's just a random text from one of my graduate advisors after I gave some random presentation. And she just said, "You did a great job. I'm so proud." And to me, that always instills a lot of pride in my kind of feelings about that. I also have a picture of me running my first marathon. So I did a lot of half marathons, but I was like, oh, I don't think I could ever do a marathon. And so I have a picture of that in my good news folder because it took a lot of training and it took talking with a sports dietitian to make sure I got my nutrition and I was fueling myself correctly. And it took a lot and I was very intimidated getting up to that starting line with all these other runners and things like that, even though I've run, 20, 30 half marathons before. I had a lot of the skill to do it, but I still felt like a complete fraud when I was with the other marathon runners. So I look back at that as a sense of pride. So I would encourage you to even think about, non-work related things in your life where you've worked hard and maybe you felt insecure, but now it's a sense of true pride. Again, I go back to my friend that she has pictures of her kids because she was, that nervous mom at first, but now she feels like a fantastic mom later down the road.
That's great. There's a comment in the chat box. It says, great idea to have a motivational folder like that to get us through the hard times. So thanks for that
Absolutely.
inspiration.
Yes.
So that is wonderful. Any final questions? We've come to near the end of our time together, and we want to be respectful of your time, but we also want to be sure to answer any unanswered questions that you might have before leaving out tonight. So we'll give you a second more to either just speak out, put that in the chat box, whatever feels more comfortable for you. While we're kind of waiting for some of those last questions, I just want to tell Matt and Dylan that they did a great job. There's a positive comment in the chat box about that, the great job of your delivery and your information tonight. So certainly we appreciate that and want to encourage all dietitians to have the confidence to go forth and keep that motivational folder and keep our fire burning, because we do have a great education base that we have been given and we can help a lot of people with that. So appreciate that encouragement that y'all provided to us tonight.
Absolutely.
Guess where all these comments are going? Right in our good news folder.
There you go. Yep. There you go. Yep. Yes.
And
go ahead.
I've added both Dylan and I's email to the chat. Again, if you have questions that come up later on or would like copies of the 2 articles that we published on impostorism, we're happy to send those out. Those can be great conversation starters, again, for you and your mentees in one of your meetings this spring to kind of talk about. So, yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much. And on behalf of the RD Mentorship Program, I didn't introduce Bailey. Bailey is one of our student researchers. She's Bailey Chavez on the screen there. She's one of our student researchers that's helped us through the RD Mentorship cohort this year, and she's continuing to work with us throughout this cohort. And so thanks, Bailey, for being here and helping out tonight. And thanks to all of you who take the time to mentor our mentees and for our mentees to support and learn from our mentors. I think that this whole program is really one that hopefully strengthens you professionally and strengthens our profession. And so we really sincerely appreciate your participation. Should you have any questions or need anything from Dr. Roof or myself, please feel free to email us at the RD Mentorship Gmail. Be happy to respond. So on behalf of myself and Dr. Roof and our student research team, we want to thank you tonight for being here with us, and we hope you have a great week and keep strong, keep spreading that good nutrition message. Y'all have a great evening. Thanks again, guys. Bye-bye.